This is Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview, recorded live on blogtalkradio.com on April 8, 2008.
Our whole universe was in a hot, dense state that nearly 14 billion years ago expansion started. Wait, the earth began to cool, the autotrophs began to drool, Neanderthals developed tools, we built a wall. We built the pyramids, math, science, history, unraveling the mystery that all started with a Big Bang.
Bill Prady is having a pretty good year, writer's strike and all, thanks to the success of The Big Bang Theory, the hit CBS sitcom he co-created with Chuck Lorre. If you haven't seen The Big Bang Theory, it co-stars Johnny Galecki and Jim Parsons as a couple of super nerds named Leonard and Sheldon, an in-joke for those of us who remember a sitcom master of old, the late Sheldon Leonard. Leonard produced everything from Make Room for Daddy with Danny Thomas to The Dick Van Dyke Show and The Andy Griffith Show. He was also a director, a writer, and a frequent guest star, including appearing on an episode of HBO's Dream On. More about that later. Sheldon and Leonard, the lead characters in The Big Bang Theory, have absolutely nothing in common with their namesake, that I can figure, except that he'd probably be proud of the tribute, because they are smartly drawn, literate, and most importantly, damn funny. If you haven't caught the show, here's a little clip before we get to our interview with Bill Prady.
What the hell are you doing?
I'm making petri dishes to grow throat cultures.
With lime jello?
I need a growth medium, and someone polished off the apricot yogurt. Here, swab my throat.
I don't think so.
Leonard, if I'm going to get ahead of this thing, I need to find out what's growing in my throat.
Sheldon, you are not sick. This is, but you are not.
We have no idea what pathogen typhoid penny has introduced into our environment. And having never been to Nebraska, I'm fairly certain that I have no corn husking antibodies.
So don't you think you're overreacting?
When I'm lying comatose in a hospital relying on inferior minds to cure me, these jello cultures and my accompanying notes will give them a fighting chance.
I'm going back to bed.
I love that show. Bill Prady, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thank you very much. Glad to be with you.
Delighted to have you. We've been watching this show from the first week in our house, and it's just gotten better and better week after week.
That's terrific. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
Well, I make a point of not having anybody on who's doing anything I don't enjoy. So there you go. So let's get to this first. You're co-creator of The Big Bang Theory, a show about super brainiac scientists. Can we assume that you personally are smarter than a fifth grader?
Probably somewhere between fifth and sixth, I think, is where I would land.
Is that where it just sort of ended right there at the end?
I'm a college dropout, but my first career I was a self-taught computer programmer, and that's what I did in the early 80s, I guess. And that's where I met a lot of the people who would become influences in the characters that we're doing now on The Big Bang Theory.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, it's a tremendous concept, but I have to admit, after a couple of weeks, personally, I'd become a little intimidated by writing some of the science and the technical references. Or is that really not an issue?
It actually hasn't been. I mean, first of all, we have a marvelous technical consultant, Professor David Salzberg from UC, who's an astrophysicist at UCLA. And we do have the ability, if we're pressed for time, to write a line of dialogue and write science to come, and and get an answer from David. We often pester him with near impossibilities. What's a small project Sheldon and Leonard might have done over a weekend a few years ago that was interesting enough that there would be a paper as a result of it that would be presented at a conference? And he'll say, "Well, let me think about that," and he'll get back to you. But a lot of times we also do a little research ourselves and take a shot at it, and we get pretty close. That's how we did the pilot. We researched the science, and then we had David check it for us. And as I'm proud to say, and as I have an official forged UCLA transcript from him, I got a B plus. Chuck and I got a B plus on the pilot. So
very good, very good. Well, now you mentioned something that actually was a plot, which was that episode where we do find them making a scientific presentation, or actually, I'm sorry, I think it's Leonard makes the presentation, and then Sheldon shows up in disguise later to tear it apart, and it's something like that. You always wonder, is there real science at work? I'm not smart enough to know.
Oh, is the science real? Every bit of the science is real. Absolutely every bit, every reference, every notation on a whiteboard behind them, every bit of the scientific dialogue is real. Some of the things are apparently inside jokes in the science world, and David will explain them to us, and we will say, well, yes, I can see how that might be an inside joke in the science world. But everything is accurate. And David's there when we film, and so if we're going to change a joke on the spot, and if that changes the science, then he'll be right there to change the science. And actually, a couple of weeks ago, when we were changing jokes on the stage, he just came in and pitched a joke, and it had nothing to do with science, and it was very funny, and we put it in the show. So.
Oh God, the astrophysicist is writing jokes now.
The astrophysicist wrote one, and he got a little taste of it. Now he pitches enthusiastically every week.
How funny. How funny. Let me, I have a feeling we might get some calls, so let me give out our phone number. If you're listening live today, April 8th, to Bill Prady, give him a call, 646-595-3135. Tell me about the genesis of the Big Bang Theory. I remember reading about it, and it's probably been about a year now, and thinking, nah, it'll never fly. I mean, at the time, I thought that Cavemen, the exact opposite of your show, actually seemed like a better bet on paper because of the science involved.
Oh, because our show was science-y? Is that?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the show isn't about science any more than saying, gee, why would anybody but cab drivers watch Taxi? Our show is about the feeling of being an outsider, which is a feeling we all share. I think everyone has at times in their life looked at somebody else and says, gee, he's got it all figured out, she's got it all figured out, I find myself on the outside, why can't I have it figured out? And then the question is, what if you were the smartest guy in the world? Would it give you any leg up? And it turns out it doesn't give you any leg up at all. So that that to us is what the show has always been about. The genesis of it is, I had worked with Chuck for many years on Dharma and Greg, and I had gone off to do some other projects, and he had gone off to do 2.5 Men with Lee Aronson, and we started talking about the notion of doing a pilot, and we kicked around a bunch of ideas, and then we did this in a very unusual way. We didn't develop it with a network or studio. We developed it on spec, and if anyone's interested in doing that, step one is partner with a person who has an incredibly successful sitcom. Would be step one in that process, because it gives you a great deal of access. So we were developing two projects. We were developing one project that was about a young woman who was sort of on her own for the first time in her life. Maybe she'd always been with with her folks or a boyfriend, and she'd just broken up, and she was kind of on her own and a little lost. And so we had that project. And then we were doing another project, and we had talked for years about these guys I knew back in the computer business, and some other people from that time in my life who were, a particular kind of person. And so we developed a show about two of those guys, and then one day we both had the same idea, which is what if these guys met that woman. Now we actually did the pilot twice. The first time we did it, the woman was we made her sort of rough on the outside and damaged on the inside, And we shot that pilot, and it really felt wrong. The show was really out of balance. She was just too rough for these guys, and you didn't want her around them. And CBS amazingly said, "Let's try it again." And so we rewrote it. We recast the part. We went with the incomparable Kaylee Cuoco. She's just remarkable. And then that's the show that went on the air.
Since you mentioned her, I'll ask you about her. It seems like even as Johnny and Jim have really fitted themselves to their roles, that she's come probably the furthest in getting a handle on the role that she plays. And it just seems like she's far more comfortable in her skin like a week ago than she was, 4 or 5 months ago.
I think that in the best of all possible worlds, when you're doing weekly television, the characters become better defined as each week goes by, and as the characters become better defined and the actors find themselves more comfortable in the characters, you ought to see that. You ought to see that that kind of progression. And part of it is the audience is, I think, you spend more time with Penny and you get to know her. There was an odd discussion about Penny. I remember when we first started that, the notion that Penny was a dumb blonde, which was very peculiar to us because we'd never intended for her to be. In fact, we always say Penny represents the audience in the show, and I'll say Penny knows what we know. When it comes to these guys and this stuff, and she's the one who gets, when she says "huh," she's saying "huh" to something that pretty obscure. The other thing that as you spend more time with her and she spends more time around the guys, you see the difference between book smarts and street smarts, and we say that Penny's a person who knows how to rebuild a tractor engine, and these guys don't. And I think that we saw it early on when they were discussing how to put together her IKEA bookshelf, and she was putting together her IKEA bookshelf.
That's good. I mean, I was actually going to ask you to talk a little bit about each of the characters. I think you've covered Penny pretty well. Let's try Sheldon. What can you tell us about Sheldon?
Well, I think the easiest way to look at Sheldon and Penny both are the forces that tug on Leonard in opposite directions. And Penny tugs Leonard out into the world, and Sheldon tugs him away from the world. And Sheldon is not comfortable with people, and he's not comfortable with conversation, and he's not comfortable with change. And he's not comfortable with a lot of things. He finds a particular kind of joy in the world, and it's the joy of routine. It's the joy of his work. It's the absolute. We get the sense that Sheldon, when working on something, and he's a theoretical physicist. He works in his mind. He's one of the people imagining how the building blocks of the universe go together. And that kind of order and perfection is a lot more appealing to Sheldon than the messy disorder of human interaction. And I think if he could find a way to make it through the world without talking to people, I think it would be just fine. And
Sheldon,
go ahead.
I was going to say Sheldon is the only one of the 4 men on the show who doesn't seem to have noticed that there's anything physically different about Penny from the rest of them.
We don't get the sense that Sheldon particularly looks at he seems without any romantic desire, and in fact we're in an episode we're working on now where we will meet his sister. And we talk about the continuation of the Cooper line. Sheldon will probably talk about seeing his work as his legacy. So I don't think Sheldon ever imagines himself in a relationship or in a family. I don't think he's incapable of it, but it just isn't. It isn't anywhere up there on his list of priorities.
I get the sense it's not a matter of whether he's straight or gay. He's just not interested.
they're really, I couldn't put a name to it. There seems to be a certain asexuality to him, doesn't there? We modeled, Sheldon on some people that I knew and some other people we've seen, and there are some interesting folk on the internet who have little webcasts, and they are people that are similar to Sheldon, and there seemed to be that sort of characteristic theme of no need for any kind of human contact, let alone romantic contact. On the other hand, there are some things that he really does seem to like doing with his friends. I mean, they're big game players, and he likes doing that. They like going and playing paintball and other sorts of things. And I wonder about Sheldon, and if I knew Sheldon, I'd be curious to ask him if he's more comfortable playing paintball or something where you're sort of where it has a role playing aspect to it than being out there and being himself. And I'll bet that there's some truth to that.
I guess a great season 2 or 3 twist for Sheldon would be if suddenly Penny took an interest in him for some strange reason, and you could probably spend weeks playing that out.
Well, we always talk about stories where Penny needs something from Sheldon, because theirs is the, and it's not an antagonistic relationship, but their relationship has some friction to it, and naturally so, because she and he, the two of them represent the sort of the competing poles on Leonard.
Mm. And let's talk about Leonard, Johnny Galecki's character. He obviously has an interest in girls, unlike his roommate. What else do we need to know about?
Johnny is. I think Johnny, to me, is the emotional center of the show. He's the. I personally find that he's the character I most comfortably personally identify with. That he's the guy who sort of nerd by breeding, but aspires to something else, and he's open to Penny telling him how to dress better, or what's there beyond this world. There's I'm a big musical comedy fan, and Leonard in my mind is always Cornelius in Hello, Dolly, who sings to Barnaby that there's a world out there beyond Yonkers. and there's a world out there beyond science, and that he sees more, that he aspires, and of the characters, he's the character most in motion in his life, and that's very interesting to me. He also, like many characters who find themselves in the center, is the Mary Tyler Moore or the Kermit the Frog paradigm, the sort of sane center in the middle of craziness at times, and then at times he's crazy himself.
And let's talk about the supporting cast, Raj and Howard. What purpose do they serve in there?
Well, they do. When you meet them in the pilot, they do a wonderful thing, because they, you've met Leonard and Sheldon, and you evaluate them. You decide who they are, and then here come their two friends, and you say, "Oh, look at that!" In their world, Leonard and Sheldon are near the middle, not the extremes, and Koothrappali and Wolowitz bracket them on either side. If Sheldon is withdrawn, Koothrappali withdrawn to the point where he can't speak to half the world, and if Leonard wants to be outgoing, there's Wolowitz outgoing to a fault. So the notion that he doesn't need to figure out how to deal with women in the world, that he's got it made. And But they also the other thing that they do, and I remember this so clearly from the time that I spent working with people like this, is that idiosyncrasies are acknowledged and not. No one pushes anyone to change. You know, the fellow that I worked with a fellow who could not speak to women, and he would simply shut up when they walked into the room, and we all said, well, that's his nature, and that's would you send him to go talk to that woman over there? No, you wouldn't, because any more than you would ask a deaf man to conduct an orchestra. It's just his nature. And I think that that's one of the great things about these kind of characters, is that they are accepting of each other's idiosyncrasies.
Let me give out our number again. I know we've got a number of people following us on the web chat, and I imagine there's a number listening live. 646-595-3135, but only call if you're listening live. Otherwise, we're not here. Bill, Johnny Galecki was a known quantity before this show, thanks to his run on Roseanne. And Kaylee spent several seasons on 8 Simple Rules. Where on earth did you find Jim Parsons?
He came in and auditioned.
Really?
Yeah.
Was he what you had imagined?
Yeah. Yes,
wow.
Absolutely. There were a number of people who came in who were terrific, and but Jim came in and was astonishing, and every now and then you buy a lottery ticket and you win, and this was exactly that. It was the most ordinary of processes to find someone. It was having a casting director who put out the call to agents and described the character, and he came in and he did it. And then he came back to a callback, and he did it again. And we took him to the studio, and he did it again. And we took him to the network, and he did it again. And he does it every week.
Wow. And was it unfair to say that he plays Niles to Johnny's Frasier at times?
There are so many comedy teams that you can look at and make comparisons to. I actually find that he comes closer to playing Cramden to Johnny's Norton,
really?
or Stan to Johnny's Ollie. I think that sometimes we say that these are the smartest dumb guys in the world. And I think we in terms of archetypes, I think we to a great extent are we go to the Honeymooners and to Laurel and Hardy. And I think I think that so did. So does everybody. I mean, I think I think the great comedy teams wind up, owing so much to that kind of comedy structure, which, my goodness, goes all the way back to, it's a vaudeville structure. It's very, very old. It's the one person who with the plan and his sidekick who by his very nature obstructs him.
Do you ever worry, and I know it's early in the run, I mean, just completing your first season, but you have been renewed. Do you worry about it being too easy to focus on Sheldon and turn him into kind of the anti-Fonz? I mean, so uncool that he's cool?
We just sort of follow the stories where they take us, and I don't think we really, I don't know if we think that sort of thing through.
Personally, I'd like to see Sheldon cross over onto some other CBS shows. I was thinking about this, like, maybe we see Sheldon on Survivor, or maybe in like Big Brother.
Well, I think Sheldon wouldn't survive, and I think Sheldon walks into the Big Brother house, takes a look, and says, "Well, this won't do."
Well, okay. Along that line, though, what about having him do having him walk through like CSI and explaining how improbable the show's science is?
There you go. My partner, is involved right now. They swapped CSI and Two and a Half Men swapped writing staffs.
That's what made me think of it exactly.
Yeah, and so they've been doing that, and so I think that might take care of swapping over here in this neighborhood for a while.
All right. I want to play one more clip from the show, if you could give us a second here, particularly for folks who maybe who are listening. I know we have a lot of people listening, but might not be as familiar with the show, or let me just say, I just particularly found this funny.
Okay.
Put this in the bathroom. What for? I need to measure my fluid intake and output to make sure my kidneys aren't shutting down.
I mixed pancake batter in this.
No, that measuring cup has always been for urine.
You had time to make a label for everything in this apartment, including the label maker, but you didn't have 10 seconds to make one that said urine cup?
It's right here on the bottom.
Huh. I guess I owe the Betty Crocker Company a letter of apology.
Bill, that was such a great bit. It was. I remember laughing the first time, and then I wanted to go back and play it again. And the more I listened, I mean, it's just one of those examples where when you get the timing down on a sitcom, you really get it down, don't you?
I mean, this is an example of an extraordinary cast, and this is an example of lines that work because their character. They can't be quoted out of context. They are these two guys, and then you have Johnny and Jim come in and deliver that, and it's just remarkable.
Well, we were talking before the clip about crossover, but one of the places where there is crossover is between the show and the web, where, for example, the video of Sheldon and Leonard tussling at a scientific presentation shows up on YouTube the very same night that it airs.
It was actually up before. It was up a week. It was up a week before, and just to see if anyone might find it. And I think a couple hundred people actually did find it. And it's also not the same footage that was used in the show. So what we put up on the web was what we assumed Howard shot. And it's longer than what was in the show, and I think cut a little differently.
That's funny. And there's frequent web references, where one of the characters will give out a URL. Are those always valid URLs?
No, they're not. They're not. It's an extraordinary amount of work to given the how fast we work here and how much stuff changes. And then the difficulty of getting stuff up on the web. One of the things I really hope that we can do in the second season is coordinate the internet material better with the show, and I think we will. And one of the things actually that was a result of the new Writers Guild contract is we now have the ability to pay writers to create material for the internet. So it makes it a lot easier to generate material when it's not being done on a volunteer basis. So hopefully we'll have better coordination next season.
Very good. Well, Bill, we've got a call here on the line for you. Hi, do you have a question for Bill Prady?
Yeah, hi. It's me again, Bob. It's becoming a habit now, I think. No, it's just I don't work today in the office, so I can actually, I do my sort of like literary stuff, and I like to sort of like listen to, your programs because they have a lot of interesting guests on whose programs I've seen since I was a child. One of the questions that I thought I'd ask, and having seen, your little tags about what you're going to be talking about, like the Muppets and things, you did mention that, Kermit, who I'd actually grown up with, as a child, and I really liked that character. And I did actually just before, as the show started, I'd actually gone onto the website itself, and I saw, what the series was about, what it was basically about. And it seems very interesting. And one of the things that I thought about just now was, do you think it'll ever be as popular as Friends?
Oh, our show?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be a nice thing to aspire to? I think Friends had a terrific run and was very popular. I think that it succeeded by having respect for its characters, by believing in its characters as real people. I think one of the things that contributes to a longevity of a sitcom or any show is consistency in character. The notion that when you come back next week, the people are who you've come to know them to be. And I think shows that fail often fail because the characters change. They're whatever the writers needed them to be that week. And one of the things that we have here is an almost obsessive need to protect who these characters are. Not to say, well, this is a funny joke, let's use it. If it goes, if it flies in the face of who these characters are and what they would really do. So, could we wind up that popular? I would certainly hope so. And what do we do to achieve that? We make these, we make the characters real, and we try to have the comedy come out of real situations, and we want the situations to be relatable emotionally, even if they're not relatable in detail. You can't, with the exception of physicists, you can't relate to the notion of presenting a paper at a conference on physics, but you can relate emotionally to an argument with somebody you've done work with as to how you should proceed, as to how partners should proceed in something. So that's the goal, is to create an emotional connection. And I'm glad you're a Muppet fan. I was a big Muppet fan growing up, and I had the astonishing privilege of working for Jim Henson for 6 years, the last 6 years of his life. I'm sorry?
That's really good. I wish I had that opportunity.
It was an amazing time. That's where I first began writing, and I did so many different things there. Among my favorite things that I did there was there's a short 3D movie called Muppet Vision 3D, which plays at the Disney theme parks in the United States, in Florida and in California. And I remember when we did this, walking out of with the producer of the movie, and she commented to me that this will last, and someday our children will come to see this. And it was just last year that I took my then 7-year-old daughter to see it, and completed that circle, and a remarkable experience.
Oh, that's brilliant. And so how was it like to actually be on the Muppet Show? With
well, I wasn't there. I wasn't there on the Muppet Show. I was there. I came after the Muppet Show had been completed, and there were a number of projects that the Muppets at that point were doing, and there were new series that Jim was in the sort of beginning stages of creating. So I wound up involved in a hodgepodge of Muppet projects, from comic books to there was a short-lived series called the Jim Henson Hour, and a few other things. Jim was an amazing creative energy. Jim had the ability to have an idea or hear an idea and say, it's just sort of, let's go try that. And I actually the first thing that I ever wrote, because I started working at the Muppets in consumer products, and that had to do with my transition from the world of computers. And the very first thing that I ever wrote that was ever performed, it wasn't produced, was that year the United States Post Office had issued they issue a love stamp every year, and that year the stamp had a puppy on it, and they thought it would be fun if Jim's character, Rolf the dog from the Muppet Show, made the presentation of the new stamp. And they weren't going to do it, and because it needed to be written. And I remember saying, well, listen, if nobody's going to try to write this, can I take a shot at it? And I sat down and I thought, well, dogs and mailmen. And I said, there's a story to tell about dogs and mailmen. So I had Ralph the dog give a speech introducing the stamp, in which he took the opportunity to clear up a few misconceptions about dogs and mailmen, and he explained that the animosity that's perceived to exist is completely untrue. In fact, dogs dogs love mailmen, and we love when they come to the door and we bark a greeting, and then when the mailman goes to leave, we're so sad that he's leaving. We understand he has his rounds to complete, but we might follow after him, begging him to stay, but he has to go, so maybe we'll gently tug on his pant leg a little bit, but of course he really has to go, so he might struggle to get away, so that we might get a better purchase by sinking our teeth into the flesh of his calf and pulling him back. And then Ralph said, "But I digress." And I remember writing that piece, and I had a little office in the basement of the Muppet offices on the Upper East Side of New York, and I was sitting there, and Jim was a very tall man. Jim was about 6'6", and I was aware of him standing in the doorway before he said anything, and I looked up, and he said, and you have to remember that Jim and Kermit shared a voice, which was an odd thing, because Kermit was talking to you, and he said, did you write this Rolf piece about the mailman? I said yeah. He said, yeah, I think we're going to do that. I said, oh. Wow. I said, do you want to have any notes? Should we make any changes? He said, no, I think we'll go with it the way it is. And that was that. And then I wrote a whole bunch of very odd things for the Muppets and some very silly things. And then the last thing that I wrote when I was there was the tribute to Jim after his death, the network special, and from time to time I've gone back and done projects with them. I'll get a call, and for some odd little thing, and I'll go back and work with the guys for a couple of days, and it's always an amazing treat. And all the performers and are just the coolest people, and I miss them every day. They're just remarkable.
Wow. Well, Colleen, you got a very good story there for that question.
I know, it's excellent. I'm so pleased.
Good to talk to you, Colleen.
Yeah, very good to talk to you as well.
Thanks for calling in.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. So, Bill, you've worked on a number of genre favorites over the years. Obviously, Muppets was one. Struck a real chord with Colleen. Let's talk about a couple of the other ones. I know people will kill me if I don't ask you about Gilmore Girls. I think you worked on the 4th season?
For a single season of Gilmore Girls.
Anything you can tell us about that show? I know that's still very popular, and it was not necessarily the biggest audience in the world, but a very loyal audience. I
will say that, like many people, I enjoy watching the Gilmore Girls.
Is it any particular Bill Prady touches during that season that carried on?
The Gilmore Girls is very, very much the work of Amy Sherman Palladino and her husband Dan Palladino, and it is a very particular vision that they have, and I enjoyed the Gilmore Girls very much as a viewer. And I think it continued to be their vision, while through all the various people who came on it at times to help them, and it's very much Amy's show.
That's a very political answer, I think I got there.
All right.
All right. Let me try a different one. You wrote an episode of Star Trek Voyager.
Oh, this is a fantastic story. Well, let me correct that by saying this is a story I personally find fantastic, because I'm in the story, and I find stories that have me in them are just inherently interesting to me. I wrote the story for an episode of Star Trek Voyager, and the episode wound up being called Bliss, I think. And it was during the 5th season of Dharma and Greg, and I had been on Dharma for its entire 5-year run. And there is a thing that happens in February, and it is the notion that there are no more stories. We're out of stories this year. We will never come up with another story. We're done. And I remember going to bed and just saying, just basically waiting for the muse of television to visit me during the night. And sure enough, at 3:00 in the morning, I woke up and I said, "My God, I have the most amazing story." And I never do this, and I wrote it down on a pad of paper by the bed, and I went back to sleep, content that the next day I would be able to go into the office and we have a story to do. And I got up and I looked at what I had written down, and it was a great story. It was a Star Trek Voyager story. Now, I'm a big Star Trek fan all my life, and like Leonard and Sheldon are Star Trek fans, and I had written on a piece of paper notes, and in fact, it actually was so complete. It had act breaks. I must have written for 10 minutes, and it was a functional outline. And I called my agent and I said, "Listen, I've got this Star Trek Voyager story," and I said, "What do I do with it?" And he said, "Nothing. Go back to work." And I said, "No, you've got to believe me." I said, "This is a perfectly formed story. They'll want this." And he at the time represented Michael Piller, who you may or may not know was one of the and he called Michael. And I met Michael. We had lunch, and it was amazing meeting him. A huge fan of his work. And he said, "So what's the story?" And I tell him the story, and he said, "Well, you're absolutely right. That's a great Star Trek story." He says, "Let me give a call over to Brannon Braga." Brannon was running Star Trek Voyager at the time.
Right.
So he calls Brannon. Brannon calls me. Brannon says, "Tell me the story again," because Michael just gave it to me detailed. And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Yeah, that's a story. We'll do that." And he said, "Can you write it?" And I said, "Brannon, I can't. I'm running Dharma and Greg." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what." He said, "We'll get a writer to write it." He says, "But do you want to come in while we break the story?" And the expression "to break the story" meaning to outline the story in detail in preparation for writing it. And I said, "Oh my God, I'd love to be there for that." And in an act of just kindness to a crazed fan, the Star Trek Voyager writing staff stayed late into the evening so that I could come over after I finished my day of work at Dharma, and I met them over at their offices at Paramount about 7 o'clock at night, and we worked till about 11 o'clock at night, and we broke out the story, and they assigned it to one of their writers. Name escapes me, but a very, very, very talented fellow. And they went off and wrote and produced the episode, and I came by while they were shooting it, and it was watched them shoot a couple of scenes, and it was really, 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 really cool.
And so when Dharma ended, or at some time in there, why no more Star Trek scripts from you though?
I'm sorry?
Why didn't you contribute any more Star Trek scripts?
Well, periodically I would call Brannon and I would pitch scripts, and I nearly went to work on Enterprise, and it's actually one of my great regrets, because I had gone to do, I was doing a 1-hour series for a while, and I went out and talked to Brannon, and I said, I think I'd like to, give this a shot. And at the same time, I'd gotten a call from Cohen and Muchnick, and they had a sitcom called Good Morning Miami, which had been renewed on the condition that somebody be brought in to sort of revamp it a little bit. And I was encouraged by many people to take that offer instead of the Star Trek offer, and Brannon made me an offer to come work on Enterprise, and I had a really rough time on Good Morning Miami, and ultimately I wasn't able to accomplish what was what everyone hoped could be done with the show, and I left. I quit, and to this day when I look back on that year, I wish I'd gone to work on Star Trek. Who knows what that would have led to. That would have, I would be doing a different thing now. But in terms of what that year was like, I wish I'd done it differently.
I remember Good Morning Miami. That was a tough show to get your arms around as a viewer.
It was very difficult. It was very, very difficult, and I was never able to sort of understand what the intent of the thing was, and and to figure out a way to make the stories sustain. And it's one of those things. There have been two experiences where I've been, where the offer has been very flattering, and people, please come and help, this situation that's in trouble. And when you get a call like that, it's a flattering call. Somebody saying we're having difficulty and we think you're the person who can help. Unfortunately, in both cases, it wound up being a situation where I said, you know what, I can't help. I don't know what to do. I don't know. There's some inherent problems in this thing. Sort of, my friend Jeff Greenstein talks about TV shows having a DNA, and sometimes there's something flawed in the DNA of something, and you just kind of can't swing it back around and get it to get up there and run away. So yeah, no, I talked to Brandon. I think Brandon he's writing on 24 this year, and I've run into him. I ran into him a while back, and we talked about regretting the choice that I made that year.
Well, you've worked, written, and produced on a number of shows, but the one I want to ask you about before we run out of time was a longtime favorite in our house, and that was Dream On. And I'm kind of wondering what your role in that was.
Dream On was great. Dream On was my first half-hour writing job, and I met John Landis, who was the executive producer of Dream On, while I was at the Muppets, and we met one day. He was directing it was the Disneyland 35th anniversary special. It was shot at the theme park, and there was a Muppet segment in it, which I had written, and I met John. And John really very, very, very much responsible for a chunk of my career. Among other things, just encouraging me, saying, you've done this Muppet stuff for a while, and you could go do other things. And he said, let me know when you want to try something else. And I remember calling him and saying, I'd like to try something else. And he says, well, all right, we'll get you on Dream On. And I said, all right. And Stephen Angle was running Dream On at the time, and John recommended me with in the way a boss can, sort of like telling Stephen it's up to you, but put a little pressure on him, and I'm glad he did. And Stephen now works here at the Big Bang Theory, and I spent it was two shooting seasons at Dream On, which because of HBO were 3 airing seasons. So the last 3 seasons of the show is a great show to work on. I learned so much about story and structure and plot and character working on that show. Just loved it.
I have to ask you, because she's dying to know, did you have a CompuServe account back in those days?
Did I have a CompuServe account?
I'll tell you why. Yeah. Did you ever use CompuServe?
I think I did years and years and years and years ago.
Yeah. My wife somehow in the early days of the Wild West Internet wound up corresponding with you and David Fury via CompuServe at the time you were doing Dream On.
Is that so?
Yeah. So we always felt a little extra tug on that show. So
it's funny. I met Dan Schneider, and Dan, who was an actor and head of the class and now produces all the kid sitcoms over at Nickelodeon, wonderful writer, and his wife has the same story that we were email buddies during a period of time when I was on I think at the Muppets or something. So apparently I have some Night Stalker personality that talks to people, and then I have no memory of it.
I want to slip in one last clip from from Big Bang, and then we'll wrap up with a couple last questions before we let you get out of here. If it will play. All right, well,
The liquid metal Terminators were created in the future by Skynet, and Skynet was developed by Miles Dyson, but that future no longer exists due to Dyson's death in Terminator 2.
Okay, then riddle me this. Assuming all the good Terminators were originally evil Terminators created by Skynet but then reprogrammed by the future John Connor, why would Skynet, an artificial computer intelligence, bother to create a petite, hot 17-year-old killer robot?
Skynet is kinky?
Artificial intelligences do not have teen fetishes.
Oh, wait, they use it to
Well, too late, I win.
I love that show. So when did you know that you could support yourself doing this kind of work? Was it when you wrote the Muppets?
I don't know that I can. I don't know that I can. I'm terrified every day that I'll have to go back and see if Radio Shack will take me back.
Is that where you started?
I did work at Radio Shack. I don't think anyone ever doing this for a living ultimately becomes comfortable that they can continue to do this for a living. This is, this, like acting, is a precarious line of work. You're unsure every day, and so truly the answer to your question is that day has yet to arrive.
Does it help to be credited with co-creating a show now, that in terms of being able to pay the bills in the future?
It helps. It helps for now.
Is this the first show that you have created or
Yes.
co-created?
Yes.
That must be very exciting.
It's very exciting.
Yeah. So what's ahead? Obviously you've got another season on Big Bang clearly ahead of you. Could you see yourself going, 5 to 7 years on this show?
I'd like to do this show. It's hard to focus on anything pretty much beside this. I will do this show, and until I have a heart attack, and then I will sit in a lawn chair.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to getting a picture of that from you.
All right.
Hey, Bill. Thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media today, and continued good luck with Big Bang Theory.
My pleasure to join you. Take care then.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So, folks, you can catch The Big Bang Theory every Monday night on CBS at 8 p.m. You can also find it on the CBS website, where there's a lot more information about the show. Now, for dozens more celebrity and media newsmaker interviews, surf over to our main website, www.mrmedia.com, where you can listen to my previous conversations with Billy Bob Thornton, Cheryl Hines, Milo Ventimiglia, David Fury, Anna Gunn, Stephan Pastis, Robert Schimmel, John Provost from Lassie, and many others. And you can also read full transcriptions of those interviews there. And please think about writing an online review of Mr. Media, or marking Mr. Media as one of your favorites, whether you listen to us on Blog Talk Radio, Blueberry, Zencast, Odeo, or of course, iTunes. Finally, come back again tomorrow when my live guest will be comic book writer Ari Kaplan, who's writing a new Speed Racer series to coincide with the new Speed Racer movie. Talk to you again soon. Thanks for listening.